History of the automobile.
The history of the automobile begins as early as 1769, with the creation of steam-engined automobiles capable of human transport. In 1807, François Isaac de Rivaz designed the first car powered by an internal combustion engine running on fuel gas, which, although not in itself successful, led to the introduction of the ubiquitous modern gasoline or petrol-fueled internal combustion engine in 1885. The year 1886 is regarded the year of birth of the modern automobile, with the Benz Patent-Motorwagen, by German inventor Karl Benz. Cars that are powered by electric power briefly appeared at the turn of the 20th century but largely disappeared from use until the turn of the 21st century. The early history of the automobile can be divided into a number of eras, based on the prevalent means of propulsion. Later periods were defined by trends in exterior styling, size, and utility preferences.
Eras of invention. Early automobiles. Steam-powered wheeled vehicles. 17th century, 18th century.
Ferdinand Verbiest, a member of a Jesuit mission in China, built the first steam-powered vehicle around 1672 as a toy for the Chinese emperor. It was of small enough scale that it could not carry a driver, but it was, quite possibly, the first working steam-powered vehicle, automobile. Steam-powered self-propelled vehicles large enough to transport people and cargo were first devised in the late 18th century. Nicholas Joseph Cugnot demonstrated his 40-year pure steam dray, an experimental steam-driven artillery tractor, in 1770 and 1771. As Cugnot's design proved to be impractical, his invention was not developed in his native France. The center of innovation shifted to Great Britain. By 1784, William Murdoch had built a working model of a steam carriage in Redruth, and in 1801 Richard Trevithick was running a full-sized vehicle on the road in Camborne. Such vehicles were in vogue for a time, and over the next decade such innovations as handbrakes, multi-speed transmissions, and better steering developed. Some were commercially successful in providing mass transit, until a backlash against these large speedy vehicles resulted in the passage of the Locomotive Act, 1865, which required self-propelled vehicles on public roads in the United Kingdom to be preceded by a man on foot waving a red flag and blowing a horn. This effectively killed road auto development in the UK for most of the rest of the 19th century. Inventors and engineers shifted their efforts to improvements in railway locomotives. The law was not repealed until 1896, although the need for the red flag was removed in 1878. The first automobile patent in the United States was granted to Oliver Evans in 1789.
19th century.
Among other efforts, in 1815, a professor at Prague Polytechnic, Joseph Bozek, built an oil-fired steam car. P-27 Walter Hancock, builder and operator of London steam buses, in 1838 built a four-seat steam Phaeton P-27. In 1867, Canadian jeweler Henry Seth Taylor demonstrated his four-wheeled steam buggy at the Stansted Fair in Stansted, Quebec, and again the following year. The basis of the buggy, which he began building in 1865, was a high-wheeled carriage with bracing to support a two-cylinder steam engine mounted on the floor. What some people define as the first real automobile was produced by French Amedee Bally in 1873, who built self-propelled steam road vehicles to transport groups of passengers. The American George B. Selden filed for a patent on May 8, 1879. His application included not only the engine but its use in a four-wheeled car. Selden filed a series of amendments to his application which stretched out the legal process, resulting in a delay of 16 years before the U.S. 549,160 was granted on November 5, 1895. Karl Benz, the inventor of numerous car-related technologies, received a German patent in 1886. The four-stroke petrol, gasoline, internal combustion engine that constitutes the most prevalent form of modern automotive propulsion is a creation of Nikolaus Otto. The similar four-stroke diesel engine was invented by Rudolf Diesel. The hydrogen fuel cell, one of the technologies hailed as a replacement for gasoline as an energy source for cars, was discovered in principle by Christian Friedrich Combustion in 1838. The battery electric car owes its beginnings to Anios Jedlik, one of the inventors of the electric motor, and Gaston Plant, who invented the lead-acid battery in 1859. The first carriage-sized automobile suitable for use on existing wagon roads in the United States was a steam-powered vehicle invented in 1871 by Dr. J. W. Carhart, a minister of the Methodist Episcopal Church, in Racine, Wisconsin. It induced the state of Wisconsin in 1875 to offer a $10,000 award to the first to produce a practical substitute for the use of horses and other animals. They stipulated that the vehicle would have to maintain an average speed of more than 5 miles per hour over a 200-mile course. The offer led to the first city-to-city automobile race in the United States, starting on July 16, 1878, in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and ending in Madison, via Appleton, Oshkosh, Waupun, Watertown, Fort Atkinson, and Janesville. While 7 vehicles were registered, only 2 started to compete, the entries from Green Bay and Oshkosh. The vehicle from Green Bay was faster, but broke down before completing the race. The Oshkosh finished the 201-mile course in 33 hours and 27 minutes, and posted an average speed of 6 miles per hour. In 1879, the legislature awarded half the prize. Steam-powered automobiles continued development all the way into the early 20th century, but the dissemination of petrol engines as the motive power of choice in the late 19th century marked the end of steam automobiles except as curiosities. Whether they will ever be reborn in later technological eras remains to be seen. The 1950s saw interest in steam turbine cars powered by small nuclear reactors. This was also true of aircraft, but the dangers inherent in nuclear fission technology soon killed these ideas. The need for global changes in energy sources and consumption to bring about sustainability and energy independence has led 21st-century engineers to think once more about possibilities for steam use, if powered by modern energy sources controlled with computerized controls, such as advanced electric batteries, fuel cells, photovoltaics, biofuels, or others.
Electric automobiles.
In 1828, Anios Jedlik, a Hungarian who invented an early type of electric motor, created a tiny model car powered by his new motor. In 1834, Vermont blacksmith Thomas Davenport, the inventor of the first American DC electrical motor, installed his motor in a small model car, which he operated on a short circular electrified track. In 1835, Professor Sibrandus Stratton of Groningen, the Netherlands, and his assistant Christopher Becker created a small-scale electrical car, powered by non-rechargeable primary cells. In 1838, Scotsman Robert Davidson built an electric locomotive that attained a speed of 4 miles per hour, 6 kilometers per hour. In England, a patent was granted in 1840 for the use of rail tracks as conductors of electric current, and similar American patents were issued to Lilly and Colton in 1847. Between 1832 and 1839, the exact year is uncertain, Robert Anderson of Scotland invented the first crude electric carriage, powered by non-rechargeable primary cells. The Flocken Elektrowagen of 1888 by German inventor Andreas Flocken is regarded as the first real electric car of the world. Electric cars enjoyed popularity between the late 19th century and early 20th century, when electricity was among the preferred methods for automobile propulsion, providing a level of comfort and ease of operation that could not be achieved by the gasoline cars of the time. Advances in internal combustion technology, especially the electric starter, soon rendered this advantage moot. The greater range of gasoline cars, quicker refueling times, and growing petroleum infrastructure, along with the mass production of gasoline vehicles by companies such as the Ford Motor Company, which reduced prices of gasoline cars to less than half that of equivalent electric cars, led to a decline in the use of electric propulsion, effectively removing it from important markets such as the United States by the 1930s. However, in recent years, increased concerns over the environmental impact of gasoline cars, higher gasoline prices, improvements in battery technology, and the prospect of peak oil, have brought about renewed interest in electric cars, which are perceived to be more environmentally friendly and cheaper to maintain and run, despite high initial costs, after a failed reappearance in the late 1990s.
Internal combustion engines.
Early attempts at making and using internal combustion engines were hampered by the lack of suitable fuels, particularly liquids, therefore the earliest engines used gas mixtures. Early experimenters used gases. In 1806, Swiss engineer François Isaac de Rivaz built an engine powered by internal combustion of a hydrogen and oxygen mixture. In 1826, Englishman Samuel Brown who tested his hydrogen-fueled internal combustion engine by using it to propel a vehicle up Shooters Hill in southeast London. Belgian-born Etienne Lenoir's hippomobile with a hydrogen gas-fueled one-cylinder internal combustion engine made a test drive from Paris to Joinville-le-Pont in 1860, covering some 9 kilometers in about 3 hours. A later version was propelled by coal gas. A Delamar de Boutteville vehicle was patented and trialed in 1884. About 1870, in Vienna, Austria, then the Austro-Hungarian Empire, inventor Siegfried Marcus put a liquid-fueled internal combustion engine on a simple handcart which made him the first man to propel a vehicle by means of gasoline. Today, this car is known as the first Marcus car. In 1883, Marcus secured a German patent for a low-voltage ignition system of the Magneto type. This was his only automotive patent. This design was used for all further engines, and the four-seat second Marcus car of 1888/89. This ignition, in conjunction with the rotating brush carburetor, made the second car's design very innovative. It is generally acknowledged that the first really practical automobiles with petrol-gasoline-powered internal combustion engines were completed almost simultaneously by several German inventors working independently. Karl Benz built his first automobile in 1885 in Mannheim. Benz was granted a patent for his automobile on January 29, 1886, and began the first production of automobiles in 1888, after Bertha Benz, his wife, had proved, with the first long-distance trip in August 1888, from Mannheim to Pforzheim and back, that the horseless coach was absolutely suitable for daily use. Since 2008, a Bertha Benz memorial route commemorates this event. Soon after, Gottlieb Daimler and Wilhelm Maybach in Stuttgart in 1889 designed a vehicle from scratch to be an automobile, rather than a horse-drawn carriage fitted with an engine. They also are usually credited with invention of the first motorcycle in 1886, but Italy's Enrico Bernardi of the University of Padua, in 1882, patented a 0.024 horsepower, 17.9 W, 122 cc's, 7.4 cubic inches, one-cylinder petrol motor, fitting it into his son's tricycle, making it at least a candidate for the first automobile, and first motorcycle. Pages 26. Bernardi enlarged the tricycle in 1892 to carry 2 adults. P26. One of the first four-wheel petrol-driven automobiles in Britain was built in Birmingham in 1895 by Frederick William Lanchester, who also patented the disc brake. And the first electric starter was installed on an Arnold, an adaptation of the Benz Velo, built between 1895 and 1898. P25. George F. Foss of Sherbrooke, Quebec built a single-cylinder gasoline car in 1896 which he drove for 4 years, ignoring city officials' warnings of arrest for his mad antics. In all the turmoil, many early pioneers are nearly forgotten. In 1891, John William Lambert built a three-wheeler in Ohio City, Ohio, which was destroyed in a fire the same year, while Henry Natick constructed a four-wheeler in Allentown, Pennsylvania. It is likely they were not the only ones. P25.
Veteran era.
The first production of automobiles was by Karl Benz in 1888 in Germany and, under license from Benz, in France by Emil Roger. There were numerous others, including tricycle builders Rudolf Enck, Edward Butler, and Leon Bally. P20-23 Bally, using a 650 cc's, 40 cubic inches, engine of his own design, enabled his driver, Jamin, to average 45 km per hour, 28.0 mph, in the 1897 Paris Tour Rally. P23 By 1900, mass production of automobiles had begun in France and the United States. The first motor car in Central Europe was produced by Czech company Nesselsorfer Wagenbau, later renamed to Tatra, in 1897, The President Automobile. The first company formed exclusively to build automobiles was Panhard at Levasseur in France, which also introduced the first four-cylinder engine P22 formed in 1889. Panhard was quickly followed by Peugeot 2 years later. By the start of the 20th century, the automobile industry was beginning to take off in Western Europe, especially in France, where 30,204 were produced in 1903, representing 48.8% of world automobile production that year. In the United States, brothers Charles and Frank de Rivaz founded the Doria Motorwagen Company in 1893, becoming the first American automobile manufacturing company. However, it was Ransom E. Olds and his Olds Motor Vehicle Company, later known as Oldsmobile, who would dominate this era of automobile production. Its production line was running in 1902. The Thomas B. Jeffrey Company developed the world's second mass-produced automobile, and 1,500 Ramblers were built and sold in its first year, representing 1/6 of all existing motor cars in the U.S. at the time. Within a year, Cadillac, formed from the Henry Ford Company, Winton, and Ford were also producing cars in the thousands. Within a few years, a dizzying assortment of technologies were being produced by hundreds of producers all over the Western world. Steam, electricity, and petrol-gasoline-powered automobiles competed for decades, with petrol-gasoline internal combustion engines achieving dominance in the 1910s. Dual and even quad-engine cars were designed, and engine displacement ranged to more than a dozen liters. Many modern advances, including gas-electric hybrids, multi-valve engines, overhead camshafts, and four-wheel drive, were attempted and discarded at this time. In 1898, Louis Renault headed the Dion Belton modified, with fixed drive shaft and ring and pinion gear, making perhaps the first hot rod in history and bringing Renault and his brothers into the car industry. Innovation was rapid and rampant, with no clear standards for basic vehicle architectures, body styles, construction materials, or controls. Many veteran cars use a tiller, rather than a wheel for steering. During 1903, Rambler standardized on the steering wheel and moved the driver's position to the left-hand side of the vehicle. Most cars were operated at a single speed. Chain drive was dominant over the drive shaft, and closed bodies were extremely rare. Drum brakes were introduced by Renault in 1902. The next year, Dutch designer Jacobus Spicker built the first four-wheel drive racing car. It never competed, and it would be 1965 and the Jensen FF before four-wheel drive was used on a production car. Innovation was not limited to the vehicles themselves either. Increasing numbers of cars propelled the growth of the petroleum industry, as well as the development of technology to produce gasoline, replacing kerosene and coal oil, and of improvements in heat-tolerant mineral oil lubricants, replacing vegetable and animal oils. There were social effects, also. Music would be made about cars, such as in My Merry Oldsmobile, a tradition that continues, while, in 1896, William Jennings Bryan would be the first presidential candidate to campaign in a car, a donated Mueller, in Decatur, Illinois. 3 years later, Jacob German would start a tradition for New York City cab drivers when he sped down Lexington Avenue, at the reckless speed of 12 mph. 19 kilometers per hour. Also in 1899, Akron, Ohio, adopted the first self-propelled paddy wagon. By 1900, the early centers of national automotive industry developed in many countries, including Belgium, home to Ving, which copied Benz, Germain, a pseudo-Panhard, and Linen and Nagant, both based on the Cobran Brilli, P25 Switzerland, led by Fritz Henried, Rudolf Enck, Saurer, Johann Weber, and Lorenz Popp, P25 Wagenfabrik AB in Sweden, Hemmel, by A.F. Hemmel and H.U. Johansson at Copenhagen, in Denmark, which only built one car, Ka. 1886, P25, Origins, starting in Bergen, Norway, in 1883, but without success, P25 to 26 Italy, where Fiat started in 1899, and as far afield as Australia, where Pioneer set up shop in 1898, with an already archaic paraffin-fueled center-pivot steered wagon. Meanwhile, the export trade had begun, with Koch exporting cars and trucks from Paris to Tunisia, Egypt, Iran, and the Dutch East Indies P25. On November 5, 1895, George B. Selden was granted a United States patent for a two-stroke automobile engine, U.S. Patent 549,160. This patent did more to hinder than encourage development of autos in the U.S. Selden licensed his patent to most major American automakers, collecting a fee on every car they produced. The Studebaker brothers, having become the world's leading manufacturers of horse-drawn vehicles, made a transition to electric automobiles in 1902, and gasoline engines in 1904, but also continued to build horse-drawn vehicles until 1919 P90 in 1908. The first South American automobile was built in Peru, the Greve. Motor cars were also exported very early to British colonies, and the first motor car was exported to India in 1897. Throughout the veteran car era, however, the automobile was seen more as a novelty than as a genuinely useful device. Breakdowns were frequent, fuel was difficult to obtain, roads suitable for traveling were scarce, and rapid innovation meant that a year-old car was nearly worthless. Major breakthroughs in proving the usefulness of the automobile came with the historic long-distance drive of Bertha Benz in 1888, when she traveled more than 80 kilometers, 50 miles, from Mannheim to Pforzheim, to make people aware of the potential of the vehicles her husband, Karl Benz, manufactured, and after Horatio Nelson Jackson's successful transcontinental drive across the United States in 1903. The 1908 New York to Paris race was the first circumnavigation of the world by automobile. German, French, Italian and American teams began in New York City February 12, 1908, with three of the competitors ultimately reaching Paris. The U.S.-built Thomas Flyer with George Schuster, driver, won the race, covering 22,000 miles in 169 days. While other automakers provided motorists with tire repair kits, Rambler was first in 1909 to equip its cars with a spare tire that was mounted on a fifth wheel.
Brass or Edwardian era.
Named for the widespread use of brass in the United States, the brass, or Edwardian, era lasted from roughly 1905 through to the beginning of World War I in 1914. Within the 15 years that make up this era, the various experimental designs and alternate power systems would be marginalized. Although the modern touring car had been invented earlier, it was not until Panhard at Levasseur System Panhard was widely licensed and adopted that recognizable and standardized automobiles were created. The system specified front-engined, rear-wheel drive internal combustion engine cars with a sliding gear transmission. Traditional coach-style vehicles were rapidly abandoned, and buckboard runabouts lost favor with the introduction of tonneaus and other less expensive touring bodies. By 1906, steam car development had advanced, and they were among the fastest road vehicles in that period. Throughout this era, development of automotive technology was rapid, due in part to hundreds of small manufacturers competing to gain the world's attention. Key developments included the electric ignition system, by Dynamotor on the Arnold in 1898, though Robert Bosch, 1903, tends to get the credit, independent suspension, actually convinced by Bally in 1873, and four-wheel brakes, by the Errol Johnston Company of Scotland in 1909. P27 leaf springs were widely used for suspension, though many other systems were still in use, with angle steel taking over from armored wood as a frame material of choice. Transmissions and throttle controls were widely adopted, allowing a variety of cruising speeds, though vehicles generally still had discrete speed settings, rather than the infinitely variable system familiar in cars of later eras. Safety glass also made its debut, patented by John Wood in England in 1905. It would not become standard equipment until 1926, on a Rickenbacker. Between 1907 and 1912 in the United States, the high-wheel motor buggy, resembling the horse buggy of before 1900, was in its heyday, with over 75 makers including Holtzman, Chicago, IHC, Chicago, and Sears, which sold via catalog. The high-wheeler would be killed by the Model T P65 in 1912, Hupp, in the U.S., supplied by Hale and Irwin, and BSA, in the UK, pioneered the use of all-steel bodies, joined in 1914 by Dodge, who produced Model T bodies. While it would be another 2 decades before all-steel bodies would be standard, the change would mean improved supplies of superior quality wood for furniture makers. Some examples of cars of the period included 1908 to 1927 Ford Model T, the most widely produced and available four-seater car of the era. It used a planetary transmission and had a pedal-based control system. Ford T was proclaimed as the most influential car of the 20th century in the International Car of the Century Awards. 1909 Morgan Runabout, a very popular cycle car. Cycle cars were sold in far greater quantities than four-seater cars in this period. 1910 Mercer Raceabout, regarded as one of the first sports cars, the Raceabout expressed the exuberance of the driving public, as did the similarly conceived American underslung and Hispano Suiza Alfonso. 1910 to 1920 Bugatti Type 13, a notable racing and touring model with advanced engineering and design. Similar models were the Types 15, 17, 22, and 23.
Vintage Era.
The Vintage Era lasted from the end of World War I, 1919, through the Wall Street crash at the end of 1929. During this period, the front-engine car came to dominate, with closed bodies and standardized controls becoming the norm. In 1919, 90% of cars sold were open. By 1929, 90% were closed. P7 development of the internal combustion engine continued at a rapid pace, with multi-valve and overhead camshaft engines produced at the high end, and V8, V12, and even V16 engines conceived for the ultra-rich. Also in 1919, hydraulic brakes were invented by Malcolm Loughead, co-founder of Lockheed. They were adopted by Duesenberg for their 1921 Model A. 3 years later, Hermann Rieseler of Vulcan Motor invented the first automatic transmission, which had two-speed planetary gearbox, torque converter, and lock-up clutch. It never entered production. Its like would only become an available option in 1940. Just at the end of the Vintage Era, tempered glass, now standard equipment inside windows, was invented in France. In this era, the revolutionary ponton design of cars without fully articulated fenders, running boards and other non-compact ledge elements was introduced in small series, but a mass production of such cars was started much later, after Wwii. Between 1922 and 1925, the number of U.S. passenger car builders decreased from 175 to 70. H. A. Tarantus, managing editor of Motor Member Society of Automotive Engineers, in a New York Times article from 1925 gave this explanation: many manufacturers were unable to keep pace with the bigger production units and falling prices, especially for the lower-priced car, commonly called the coach. Apart from the higher demand for smaller cars, Tarantus mentions the pyroxylin finish, the 8-cylinder engine, the four-wheel brakes and balloon tires as the biggest trends for 1925. Exemplary vintage vehicles. 1922 to 1939 Austin 7. The Austin 7 was one of the most widely copied vehicles ever, serving as a template for cars around the world, from BMW to Nissan. 1922 to 1931 Lancia Lambda, very advanced car for the time, first car to feature a load-bearing monocoque type body and independent front suspension. 1924 to 1929 Bugatti Type 35. The Type 35 was one of the most successful racing cars of all time, with over 1,000 victories in 5 years. 1925 to 1928 had a Mach 2/10 picoseconds, early example of ponton styling. 1927 to 1931 Ford Model A. 1927 to 1931. After keeping the brass-era Model T in production for too long, Ford broke from the past by restarting its model series with the 1927 Model A. More than 4 million were produced, making it the best-selling model of the era. The Ford Model A was a prototype for the beginning of Soviet mass car production. Gaz A. 1930 Cadillac V16, developed at the height of the Vintage Era. The V16-powered Cadillac would join Bugatti's Royale as the most legendary ultra-luxury cars of the era.
Pre-Wwii Era.
The pre-war part of the classic era began with the Great Depression in 1930, and ended with the recovery after World War II, commonly placed at 1946. It was in this period that integrated fenders and fully closed bodies began to dominate sales, with a new saloon sedan body style even incorporating a trunk or boot at the rear for storage. The old open-top runabouts, phaetons, and touring cars were phased out by the end of the classic era as wings, running boards, and headlights were gradually integrated with the body of the car. By the 1930s, most of the mechanical technology used in today's automobiles had been invented, although some things were later reinvented and credited to someone else. For example, front-wheel drive was reintroduced by André Citroën with the launch of the traction Avant in 1934, though it had appeared several years earlier in road cars made by Alvis and Cord, and in racing cars by Miller, and may have appeared as early as 1897. In the same vein, independent suspension was originally conceived by Amedee Bali in 1873, but not put in production until appearing on the low-volume Mercedes-Benz 380 in 1933, which prompted American makers to use it more widely. In 1930, the number of auto manufacturers declined sharply as the industry consolidated and matured, thanks in part to the effects of the Great Depression. Exemplary pre-war automobiles. 1932 to 1939 Alvis B20, the first with all-synchromesh gearbox. 1932 to 1948 Ford V8, Model B, introduction of the flathead V8 in mainstream vehicles. 1934 to 1938 Tatras 77, first serial-produced car with aerodynamical design. 1934 to 1940 Bugatti Type 57, a singular refined automobile for the wealthy. 1934 to 1956 Citroën Traction Avant, the first mass-produced front-wheel drive car, built with monocoque chassis. 1936 to 1955 Milligrams T-Series, sports cars with youth appeal at an affordable price. 1938 to 2003 Volkswagen Beetle, a design that was produced for over 60 years with over 20 million units assembled in several counties, awarded fourth place as car of the 20th century. 1936 to 1939 Rolls-Royce Phantom 3, V12 engine pinnacle of pre-war engineering.
Post-war era.
Since World War II, automobile design experienced the total revolution. Changes to Ponton style, without a non-compact ledge elements. One of the first representatives of that were the Soviet Gaz M20 Pobeda, 1946, British Standard Vanguard, 1947, US Studebaker Champion and Kaiser, 1946, as well as the low-production Czech luxury Tatra T600 Tetraplane, 1946, and the Italian Cis Italia 220 sports car, 1947. Automobile design and production finally emerged from the military orientation and other shadow of war in 1949, the year that in the United States saw the introduction of high-compression V8 engines in modern bodies from General Motors' Oldsmobile and Cadillac brands. Hudson introduced the step-down design with the 1948 Commodore, which placed the passenger compartment down inside the perimeter of the frame and was one of the first new design post-war cars made. The unibody strut suspended 1951 Ford Consul joined the 1948 Morris Minor and 1949 Rover P4 in the automobile market in the United Kingdom. In Italy, Enzo Ferrari was beginning his 250 series, just as Lancia introduced the revolutionary V6-powered Aurelia. Throughout the 1950s, engine power and vehicle speeds rose, designs became more integrated and artful, and automobiles were marketed internationally. Alec Isaac's Mini and Fiat's 500 diminutive cars were introduced in Europe, while the similar K-car class became popular in Japan. The Volkswagen Beetle continued production after Hitler and began exports to other nations, including the US. At the same time, Nash introduced the Nash Rambler, the first successful modern compact car made in the US, while the standard models produced by the big three domestic automakers grew ever larger in size, featured increasing amounts of chrome trim, and luxury was exemplified by the Cadillac Eldorado Brougham. The markets in Europe expanded with new small-sized automobiles, as well as expensive Grand Tours, GT, like the Ferrari America. The market changed in the 1960s. As the US Big Three automakers began facing competition from imported cars, the European makers adopted advanced technologies, and Japan emerged as a car-producing nation. The success American Motors' compact-sized Rambler model spurred GM and Ford to introduce their own downsized cars in 1960. Performance engines became a focus of marketing by US automakers, exemplified by the era's muscle cars. In 1964, the Ford Mustang developed a new market segment, the pony car. New models to compete with the Mustang included the Chevrolet Camaro, AMC Javelin, and Plymouth Barracuda. Captive imports and badge engineering increased in the US and the UK as amalgamated groups such as the British Motor Corporation consolidated the market. BMC's space-saving Mini, which first appeared in 1959, became popular and were marketed under the Austin and Morris names, until Mini became a mark in its own right in 1969. Competition increased, with Studebaker, a pioneering automaker, shutting down as the trend for consolidation reached Italy, where niche makers like Maserati, Ferrari, and Lancia were acquired by larger companies. By the end of the decade, the number of automobile marques had been greatly reduced. Technology developments included the widespread use of independent suspensions, wider application of fuel injection, and an increasing focus on safety in automotive design. Innovations during the 1960s included NSU's Wankel engine, the gas turbine, and the turbocharger. Of these, only the last, pioneered by General Motors, and incorporated by BMW and Saab, but later saw mass-market use during the 1980s by Chrysler. Mazda focused on developing its Wankel engine, which had problems in longevity, emissions, and fuel economy. Other Wankel licensees, including Mercedes-Benz and GM, never put their designs into production because of engineering and manufacturing problems, as well as the lessons from the 1973 oil crisis. The 1970s were turbulent years for automakers and buyers, with major events reshaping the industry such as the 1973 oil crisis, stricter automobile emissions control and safety requirements, increasing exports by the Japanese and European automakers, as well as growth in inflation and the stagnant economic conditions in many nations. Smaller-sized grew in popularity. The US saw the establishment of the subcompact segment with the introduction of the AMC Gremlin, followed by the Chevrolet Vega and Ford Pinto. The station wagon's estate, brake, combi, universal, body design was popular, as well as increasing sales of non-commercial all-wheel drive off-road vehicles. To the end of the 20th century, the U.S. Big Three, GM, Ford, and Chrysler, partially lost their leading position. Japan became for a while the world's leader of car production, and cars began to be mass-manufactured in New Asian, East European, and other countries. Notable exemplary post-war cars. 1946 to 1958 Gaz Antoine Pobeda, Soviet car with full ponton design. 1947 to 1958 Standard Vanguard, British mass-market car with full ponton design. 1948 to 1971 Morris Minor, a popular and typical early post-war car exported around the world. 1953 to 1971 Chevrolet Bel Air, and 1953 to 2002 Cadillac Eldorado Brougham, in its first generations, were representative of tailfin design. 1955 to 1976 Citroën DS, aerodynamic futuristic design and innovative technology, awarded third place as car of the 20th century. 1959 to 2000 Mini, a radical and innovative small car that was manufactured for 4 decades. Awarded second place as car of the 20th century. 1961 to 1975 Jaguar E-Type, a sports cat that combined good looks, high performance, and competitive pricing. 1963 to 1989 Porsche 911, Porsche's iconic sports car, was awarded 5th place as car of the 20th century. 1964 present Ford Mustang, the pony car that became one of the best-selling cars of the era. 1966 end of the 20th century Fiat 124, an Italian car that was produced under license in many other countries including the Soviet Union, where the VAZ 2101 was made available to individual consumers. 1967 NSU Row 80, the basic wedge profile of this design was emulated in subsequent decades, unlike its Wankel engine. 1969 Datsun 240Z, Japanese sports car in the U.S. that was affordable and well-built, as well as successful on the track and with consumers.
Modern era.
The modern era is normally defined as the 25 years preceding the current year. However, there are some technical and design aspects that differentiate modern cars from antiques. The modern era has been one of increasing standardization, platform sharing, and computer-aided design. Some particular contemporary developments are the proliferation of front-end all-wheel drive, the adoption of the diesel engine, and the ubiquity of fuel injection. Most modern passenger cars are front-wheel drive monocoque unibody designs, with transversely mounted engines. Body styles have changed as well in the modern era. 3 types, the hatchback, sedan, and sport utility vehicle, dominate today's market. All originally emphasized practicality, but have mutated into today's high-powered luxury crossover SUV, sports wagon, 2-volume large MPV. The rise of pickup trucks in the United States, and SUVs worldwide, has changed the face of motoring, with these trucks coming to command more than half of the world automobile market. There was also the introduction of MPV class, smaller non-commercial passenger minivans, among the first of which were the French Renault Espace and the Chrysler minivan versions in the US. The modern era has also seen rapidly rising fuel efficiency and engine output. The automobile emissions concerns have been eased with computerized engine management systems. The economic crisis of 2008 cut almost a third of light vehicle sales from Chrysler, Toyota, Ford, and Nissan. It also subtracted about a fourth of Honda sales and about a seventh of sales from General Motors. Economic crisis. Retrieved June 3, 2013. Since 2009, China has become the new world's absolute car manufacturer leader with production more than US, Japan, and all Europe. Besides large growth of car production in Asian and other countries, there has been growth in transnational corporate groups, the production of transnational automobiles sharing the same platforms, as well as badge engineering or rebadging to suit different markets and consumer segments. Since the end of the 20th century, several award competitions of cars and trucks have become widely known, such as European Car of the Year Japan, North American Car of the Year, World Car of the Year, Truck of the Year, and International Car of the Year, so that vehicles of different classes, producers, and countries win alternately. Also, Car of the Century awards were held, in which in the US the Ford Model T was named as most influential car of the 20th century. Exemplary modern cars. 1966 present Toyota Corolla, a Japanese saloon sedan that has become the best-selling car of all time. 1973 present Mercedes-Benz S-Class, electronic anti-lock braking system, supplemental restrained airbags, seatbelt pretensioners, and electronic traction control systems made their debut on the S-Class. 1975 present BMW 3 Series. The 3 Series has been on Car and Driver magazine's annual 10 Best list 17 times, making it the longest-running entry in the list. 1977 present Honda Accord Saloon Sedan, a Japanese sedan that became popular in the US. 1983 present Chrysler minivans. The two-box minivan design nearly pushed the station wagon out of the market. 1984 present Renault Espace, first mass 1-volume car of non-commercial MPV class. 1986 present Ford Taurus. This mid-sized front-wheel drive sedan dominated the US market in the late 1980s. 1997 present Toyota Prius, launched in the Japanese market and has now become the best-known hybrid electric vehicle. 1998 present Ford Focus, one of the most popular hatchbacks and Ford's best-selling world car. 2008 present Tata Nano, an inexpensive, $100,000. $2,200, rear-engined, 4-passenger city car aimed primarily at the Indian domestic market. 2008 present Tesla Roadster, the first highway-capable all-electric vehicle in serial production for sale in the US in the modern era. 2010 present, Nissan Leaf and Chevrolet Volt, all-electric car and plug-in hybrid correspondingly, launched in the US and Japanese markets in December 2010, becoming the first mass-production vehicles of their kind.